Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. And I'm really excited today. This is someone that I started following on Twitter like maybe a year ago when I first started posting. And I got her book, and I just started it, but I am really excited because I was seeing about her journey, and it's just I have to hear the story from her own mouth. So I want her to introduce herself though. So take it away. It's Mary Beth O'Connor.
Well, thanks for having me, Lindsay. I'm so glad my Twitter feed is useful. I actually, as you know, try to provide information and use it as a tool, a sort of, and an
Yeah.
encouragement in some of my recovery ideas. But yeah, I mean, my story, I always like to really show the whole arc of it because I think sometimes we jump into sort of the misery or the chaos or even the funny stories of our substance use disorder without giving context, sort of like where did that come from? Why did that happen? And for me, I mean, I always was aware that there was a clear tie between my childhood abuse and other factors, like I had multiple rapes and a violent boyfriend. But in the beginning, it was really a lot about having no real connection with my mother. And mostly she wasn't interested in connecting with me. And she was, violent sometimes, but she also left me for 3 years with a great grandmother. And for the first 6 months of my life, I lived at a nunnery. So there was a lot of sort of lack of bonding and connection and sort of feeling like I was on my own. And then when I was 9, she married my stepfather, and he was really violent with her. And he was physically and sexually violent with me. And it was just, just a house where you never knew what was going to happen. I mean, nothing might happen for a couple weeks. And
Mhm.
then, one day out of the blue for no apparent reason. So that's just a lot of stress and strain on a kid when you're living in that kind of hostile, dangerous, out of your control, environment. And so for me, that made drugs attractive. And that's, that's a pretty common pathway. Childhood uh, dysfunction, childhood traumas can often lead us to pick up substances. And so I started with alcohol when I was 12. And I always like to use the name. It was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill Wine, which I know a lot of people are familiar with. And right away, what I noticed was it made me feel better. Like, oh my gosh, like I feel like a weight's off my shoulder, like I can breathe, and I'm giggling with my girlfriend and having a sort of a moment of joy, and that captured my attention. Like, this is positive. I want more. And then it became more and more and more. So that was really the beginning of it.
Wow. I'm so glad you brought up the trauma part of, how it's in most of our stories. And I don't think that we're talking about it as much as we should be in the community. I mean, there's a few authors that I've been following lately that talk about it. What Gabor Mate, I always say his name wrong,
No,
but
that's right, actually. Yeah.
so informative. I started reading his book, and then it started clicking to me about how it affects how trauma is so um it's so impactful on addiction. It's like self-medication. Well, it's
Right.
all medication, but it's just wild. So okay, there's so many questions I want to ask you. So, how when did you get sober? It was you have quite a few years, right?
In January, I'll actually have 30 years sober. But I used until I was 32. So I used from 12 to 32, and I was shooting meth at 17. And so it was a long haul. It was a long haul. And it was mostly a miserable time. And so it was quite lengthy. I remember when I had my more years sober than I had using, but it took 20 years to get to that point. But I am going to have 30 in January, and it's an important marker of that kind of time. But I will emphasize, look, people going from 29 to 30, that's not the hard part, right? I mean, that's
Oh,
not the hard
man.
part. But it is something I'm proud of, that I was actually able to really, for me, it was really about building a really strong foundation early on that has sustained me through. But it was also about changing my techniques over time, because our recovery plan, sort of what works for us or helps us, is going to change as we grow, as we progress, as we face new challenges. And it was also about trauma recovery, right? I mean, I had PTSD and I didn't even know it. And it showed up for me as really severe anxiety. And so to really get to the sort of happy, productive, enjoying life place that I am, I had to work on that trauma recovery, which actually was harder and took longer than my substance recovery.
I bet it. It's a whole thing. So okay, so how did you get into meth? I'm just gonna straight up ask you. So how did that happen?
So this is the mid to late 70s. Well, it's probably like 77 at this point. And so I was living in Central Jersey, and meth had existed before, but it hadn't been, at least in my area, there in volume. But it was coming in volume. I mean, all the druggy friends, and I've been using drugs for years by 17. Everybody was excited. Oh, there's all this meth is coming. I hear meth's coming, and it was like news.
Wow.
Because biker gangs in Western Pennsylvania started mass producing it, and it was coming to us. So there was a wave. It was really the first big wave of meth in my area, at least. And so it was easy to get. It was, pretty much everywhere. I mean, I knew all the local drug dealers, but for me, it was really the first time that I did it, which is when I was 16. It was just that more intense rush, right? I mean, I had gone from weed to pills, from alcohol to weed to pills. I did a lot of acid for a while, but when I found meth, it just clicked. It was immediately my favorite. I mean, some people are sort of like, they're sort of multi-dexterous, if you'll say, about drugs and whatever. I was very committed to meth. As soon as I got exposed to it, it was my top choice. I was always looking for it, and I was shooting within 6 months, and I was really in full bore addiction. I mean, the whole gamut of it by the time I graduated from high school. So it was quick, and it was bad, and it was readily available.
What happened to you? Got sober when you were 32? What did something significant happen, or is it just you're just done? What happened?
I mean, it was really a combination of things, because I mean, by 32, I've been using meth for a very long time. My body's starting to show the wear and the tear. I'm starting to have physical problems, but also I couldn't hold a job because I couldn't get there. Right. I mean, I had lost job after job after job. I was really just exhausted and in despair. And then my partner was ready to throw me out. And so for me, it was really all of those things in combination that made me say to him, sort of as a last resort, well, what if I go to rehab? But I really didn't want to keep using, but at the same time, I didn't really believe it was possible for me to stop. And so it was sort of like a last gasp effort. Let's just, see what it is. Let's just see what they're going to teach me or what's going to happen, and I'll go in.
Wow. Okay. So then then you went to one? Is that?
Yeah. So I mean, it
Wow.
took a while because I didn't have insurance and I didn't have any savings, but I ended up going to a longer term inpatient women's program. It was 90 days minimum.
Cool.
And I ended up staying 5 months. And so that was, a step forward. But on the other hand, although I got a lot out of it, it wasn't really the best fit for me. And so I had to sort of figure a lot of things out on my own as well.
That's interesting. So what did you do after? Did you stay sober those 5 months that you were in there?
No, I used 3 times in my first 5 months. But as I emphasize, if I could have used 3 times in 5 months on a regular basis, I wouldn't have been in rehab. Right?
True. Exactly.
It was a lot better. And as we know, most people don't have perfect abstinence from day one. I mean, some people do, yay for them, but it's not the majority. And so that was a big step forward for me to only use 3 times in 5 months. Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, but you didn't, this is like what I've been trying to stress lately is I had multiple relapses, and the beginning was not, I was not like a one chip wonder, whatever they say. I don't know, whatever. So there were many times, but I just didn't give up. And so that's kind of like what I'm hearing is, 3 times, and then but now you're coming up on 30 years, so that's really cool. So then what were your kind of recovery things that you did that keep you sober, kept you sober? what did you do besides you did trauma therapy and treatment?
Well, so when I went into rehab, one of the challenges was that they told me that 12 steps was the one and only option. And look, it was a good fit for a lot of the women there, and I support 12 steps when it's the right fit, but it wasn't right for me.
Mhm.
I don't believe in a higher power. I was not turning my will of my life over. That was a concept I was just not comfortable with. I didn't really agree I was powerless. I wasn't thrilled about the focus on defects. So for multiple reasons, it wasn't a good fit. And I told my rehab that this isn't going to work for me. And they insisted that
Yeah.
this is the one and only way. And they told me repeatedly, if you don't do everything we tell you, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. You're going to fail. They told me directly, you will fail. And so it was really sort of a shock to me that I was in what I thought was medical treatment, and I was being told there's only this one way. But at first I believed them because, they're the experts and I'm paying them for treatment. And so I had to figure out what to do. And so I decided I was just going to sort of keep my mind and my ears open and look for the parts I could use and just ignore everything else. And so, like, I read all the AA Big Book. I read all the NA Tax. I did all the homework in rehab. I wrote all the things they made me write and all of those things. But I was always filtering it. Like, will this work for me? I mean, even just hearing people talk at meetings about strategies they were using, I was always listening. Like, I was trying not to just shut a door. I was trying to keep my ears open to actively look for ideas and concepts that I could use. And then when I got home, and I'm going to emphasize, it's 1994 and there is no Google. Okay. It doesn't exist. And so I got home and I thought, is it really true that there's no other options? And so I got in my car and I drove to the library.
Yes. Cool.
And I found other options even in 94, and there's so many more today. But at the time, I found Women for Sobriety, which is the first modern secular approach. And you don't turn your will and your life over. It's a self-empowerment approach, right?
Wow.
I found Rational Recovery, which exists a little, but today is mostly Smart Recovery. And I found SOS, which exists a little, but today is mostly LifeRing Secular Recovery. And LifeRing focuses on that I'm responsible for building my recovery plan. And also it's, with mutual support, with support from the group, with ideas, thinking about suggestions, not mandates from the group. And so I actually never followed any one program. I continued the way I started. I read all of their books and I went to all of their meetings, and I was just always filtering it for what do I think I can use. And so today we would call that a personal recovery plan or a hybrid plan. But when I did it, I didn't know anyone else who had done it and I didn't have a name for it. I just did what I thought was going to help me. And so on the substance use side, that was how I tackled it.
Oh my gosh. It's so nice to hear someone say that. Ugh. Seriously, because this is kind of how my mind goes with it, and things that worked for me in the beginning of my sobriety. And then I shifted to doing my own kind of thing, my own thing that works for me. And it's almost like not acceptable to others, which is such a strange concept, which I'm still learning to navigate. But it's so interesting. And I really love that. You just named all those different ones. Like, I love Smart Recovery. I'm actually reading a Rational Recovery book right now. I think it's old too. And I read, this is the second one I've read, and I'm like, this is good. Like, this is real. But it's almost like, I don't want to pick a side or a program. I want to, if someone wants to do that their way, that's cool, right? Like, so that I just love that. And what is LifeRing exactly? That's one I need to find out more information so I can post this stuff for people. What is LifeRing?
So I'm on the board for LifeRing. I'm also on the board for She Recovers, which we can talk about. But
Yeah.
so LifeRing's focus is, they call it the 3 S's. So it's sobriety, secularity, and self-help. But the sobriety for LifeRing includes medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorder. And, some organizations try to discourage people from using MAT, even when it's medically indicated,
Right.
or even any other medication. In LifeRing, if there's a drug that's medically indicated, and we really emphasize taken as prescribed,
Yeah.
sober for us because we do not have the medical knowledge to make, contradict their doctor's decisions, right? It's not our place.
Right.
And then on secularity, there's no religion in meetings, but a lot of our members have personal or religious or spiritual beliefs, and we don't have any opinion about that. And then it's self-empowerment, and so it's about that you own your recovery plan. It doesn't mean, like I said, you should put yourself in a box or shut your ears off, but you are the decision maker. And so, like in a LifeRing meeting where we actually have crosstalk, the members can talk to each other. You could ask the group. You could say to the group, like I'm going to a work event with alcohol for the first time on Friday. Does anyone have any suggestions? And the group, if you want, can give you ideas, but it's your job to decide which of those ideas might work for you. And so it's a discussion. It's not an order. It's not a you have to do what I say because I have more time kind of situation. It's really, but there's value in hearing ideas from other people because you might not have thought of it on your own, right? And it might be a really good idea for you. And so it's sort of that kind of a dynamic where it's mutual support and we help each other, but I decide what my plan is going to look like.
I love that. So, I've worked in addiction treatment for like 10 years now, and I got a job at the place that I went to and I got sober at. And so I started from the bottom, and the more I learn about like counseling and how to really help someone, the more I'm like, yes, exactly what you just said. Like the suggestions, and I don't know what someone should do, like, and telling them you must do this or must do that. And I think that in the beginning it was appealing to have someone like maybe tell me what to do. I mean, for maybe a brief moment. But I'm also very rebellious, as you know, many of us are. And so I think that I think that's huge though. Like I want to help other people. I want people to help me find the answer and empower me.
Well, a couple thoughts come to that. One is that it's not uncommon for people to really like the structure of, let's say, 12 steps early on. And then some of them later will start to look for other ideas. And so, like in LifeRing, we get a lot of 12-step members at around year 2, just because they're starting to look for other, to sort of reinvigorate their recovery or just see what else is out there. And that's fine. I mean, what we need in our recovery can evolve over time. Something that worked for us in the beginning may not be helpful to us later. There's a lot of examples. The other thing I'll say is that there's actually been a study that compared the effectiveness of 12 steps, LifeRing, Women for Sobriety, and SMART. It's called the Peer Alternative Study.
Mm-hmm.
And it found that they're all basically equally effective. So, it's really about what's the right fit for you. And not about what I did. And I will also say that I don't really know of any one technique that works for everybody. People are individuals. They have different learning styles, different philosophical beliefs. Some of them have a trauma history, and that can impact what works for them. And some of them have other types of, of histories or of relationship interest in what kind of relationships they want. I mean, we all have a different combination of unique features that might make one plan better or worse. And so it's like I'm on the board for LifeRing and She Recovers. And I talk about them and I hope people will look at them, but I don't care if you pick them. I just want you have choice so that you can find what's best. The other thing is the meeting formats vary a lot. So, in a 12-step meeting, there's a large chunk of the meeting is usually taken up with a speaker telling their war stories and their recovery story. But like at LifeRing, we don't have that, which means the entire meeting is for the group to talk. And so sometimes I found the drug logs in 12 steps useful in the beginning, but after a while for me, it got repetitive. And so it just depends on what you're looking for philosophically, but also in the meeting. What meeting format do you feel you're going to get the most value out of? And that can definitely change over time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I've read some studies and I remember reading one that compared different ones that I don't know. I don't think it's the one that you're talking about, but they pointed out sober supports and community was something big that they all had. I think that was like the main point, and I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, so they all share that, but I think that like the drunkalogs kind of put me in a bad negative state of mind eventually, because I don't want to identify as that anymore. And I think that's very controversial to say for some reason. But it is. And, it's great to remember where we came from and everything. But at some point, I feel like it's no longer what I need. You know what I mean? I want to stay on the other side now.
Well, I will say that that was definitely something that changed for me. So that the I'm Mary Beth and I'm an addict introduction, in the beginning, I thought that was helpful. I felt like I had to sort of beat it into my brain. But
Yeah.
when I got home by about 6 months, I was feeling like I was saying it like this is the essence of who I am, when it isn't. And so I was getting less and less comfortable with it. It's not that I forgot my use history. I still have a very clear memory of the misery of that life. But I was announcing it like it was the number one feature of me. And then when I went to my first Women for Sobriety meeting, you know what the introduction is there?
Hmm.
I'm Mary Beth and I'm a competent woman.
Ooh.
And that met me where I was at. And in LifeRing, you don't have to have any specific identifier. You can identify yourself with not just by your name or with any identifier you want. We don't require things like that. It's, again, personal choice.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, things that help us in the beginning, they don't always serve us later. And so I think it's important to revisit what your plan is and how it's working for you, because we evolve over time. The other thing I'll say is sometimes in early recovery, people can ask like, well, what's your sort of your 2-year plan it's like, I think that we don't, it's sort of a wasted time to think about that, because we change so much in the first couple of years of our recovery that we don't really know who we're even going to be in 6 months or a year or 2 years, right? Because we're really, for the first time, trying to reconnect with our true self for the first time in quite a long time. But also, who are we going to be as adults? Who are we going to be in our recovery life? That's a process that takes time. And it's part of the reason that some techniques are eventually put aside, because either you don't need them, they sort of serve their purpose, or now they're actually having a negative impact in some way. And so that to me is part of the natural evolution of recovery.
Yeah, that's so well said. I'm totally like, wow. That's amazing. And being able to decipher that for yourself and have the self-esteem and confidence to do that, I think is important. So I really, really like that. Okay, so you became a judge, right? And you went to law school. Like that is just like, holy cow. So you literally went from junkie to judge. Like, so,
Yeah.
and you wrote a book about it. I'm putting it on the picture, and putting it in the description. So if anybody wants to check it out, because, you guys, like, it's just wild. So how did that happen?
Well, one thing I will say about the book is 30% of my book is recovery. It's my first 3 years. And it does go through sort of how I approached it and what I was thinking and the analysis. Because I feel like a lot of memoirs, they stop with, I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And it's like, well, that's not how recovery works. And so I do go through the first 3 years, including the trauma side, that interplay of trauma and substance.
Oh,
But on the judge side, and I always like to emphasize dates here. So when I got sober, I was 32 years old. I actually had a Berkeley degree, undergrad degree, and good grades. But I had an embarrassingly horrific resume, right? And so when I got home, my first job out of rehab was a part-time, low-level, temporary admin job, because that's really all I was ready for. Like for me to get up every day and go to work on time and stay all the hours and not come back after lunch or whatever it might be, and do a good job and do it the next day and the next. I was 32 and I had never done it in my life. So I needed to sort of get in the habit of that. Like, I mean, it would have been, part of me felt like I had all this lost time and I wanted to rush ahead. But I really am happy that I was a little more realistic and practical, and I got the job that I needed first to just get in the habit of doing those things on a regular basis. And then my second job was a mid-level permanent full-time job, administrative job. And then my next job was a supervisory job where I got a promotion. And then at 6.5 years sober, and I emphasize the date, at 6.5 years sober, I went to Berkeley Law. And so, it was when I was ready. And
That's
I graduated from Berkeley Law in 2003. And then I worked at a big law firm. And then I did class action work for the federal government. And then when I had 20 years sober, I was appointed a federal administrative law judge in 2014. Yeah. And I did that until I was an early retirement in 2020. So, that was the arc of it, but it was always about what's the right next step. It's not like I got sober and said, I'm going to be a judge one day. I mean, who would ever?
right.
I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking maybe I can not get fired now. Like that was really the extent of my, maybe I can not get fired now. Like that was all my hopes, right? But it was always about what's my right first job, and then what's my right next step, and how do I get myself ready for that right next step? You know what I mean? If I
Mhm.
want the next job, well, what do I need to do? What skills do I need? What work history do I need to get that job? And it was just about the incremental, and it's just that I know it can be hard to be patient, but the truth is, if you really focus on the right next step in your life as a whole, it's amazing where you can go in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20. I mean, they build up, and in a way they sort of snowball, right? It sort of picks up pace as you go along. So that's what I did. I did it step by step, job by job, working my way through it as I was ready for more, as I was ready to handle more.
That's so cool. I love how you just said that about incremental, because I thought I was like making up for lost time too. And I'm like looking at other people, comparing myself to them, and really like there's no need for that. Like it doesn't even matter, right? And plus social media, like that's not really what's going on. Like we all put on a show, like, on Facebook or whatever, and it's only the good moments we see of each other on there and our families and everything. So I would get really down in the dumps. And so it's just cool, like, because that kind of happened with me of like looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, that's so crazy. Like, how did it go from here to here? But it's literally like every day you change a little bit more. And it's hard to explain, but that's exactly it. It's so cool.
Yeah, and
Mm.
it's not like I don't want to make it sound like I didn't have struggles in early recovery. I mean, I felt like I was old at 32. I had wasted my education. I had, like I said, an embarrassing resume. I mean, I was in debt. My partner, I didn't know if we were going to make it through. I had to deal with my trauma. I was in a lot of pain. I too compared myself. Well, look, she has what I would have had if I wasn't a drug addict until I was 32, or I also was hypercritical about my mistakes. And part of that was my PTSD created anxiety. But I mean, I always noticed any little imperfection or anything that I didn't do quite right. I just could spin and spin and spin about it. And I actually had to force myself to notice my progress. Like one of my recovery techniques was really to stop and look at how far I come every so often, like at 3 months or 6 months or a year, because all I could see was my mistakes, my imperfections, what I didn't have that I could have had, all the negatives. And only by like literally forcing myself to look back at, let's say, at the first year, and then to see, what, you actually have accomplished a lot in this first year. You actually are making progress. And not only that, but the upward curve, there's no indication I've sort of topped out, right? I'm still moving forward. And that
True.
helped me settle down a little bit better, and it helped me sort of feel more confident and competent in being able to move further forward, but
Yeah.
but it was a process, and it was a struggle at times, and it was a struggle at times.
Wow. Yeah. We can be really hard on ourselves. Like, yeah. It's like nobody else, I wouldn't do that to anybody else. I would never. But then, like, I'm sitting there, like, telling myself in my head, like, you messed up again. I'm like, what? Stop it. So, like, that is a lot of work. It's taken so long to even identify that critical voice in my head. It's like, oh my gosh, it's powerful. And so that's amazing. So just like realizing and being aware of it, and you were able to start changing it. And that trauma, did how do you feel about like was it a long process, you think, or how was that for you?
the,
Like,
the trauma recovery.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was aware of the connection between my drugs and my trauma. So, when I got home, I did start with an individual therapist who had expertise in trauma and some knowledge of substance use. That was sort of the best
Oh,
combination. And so, I did individual therapy with her for about 3 years. And then she put me in group therapy with other women with trauma histories. And that was a friggin' eye opener. Um,
wow.
because they were connecting more of their current reactions and their current behaviors back to the trauma in ways that I hadn't yet connected. And once I could see the links, it helped me be sort of more effective, more efficient about dealing with it. But it was all incremental progress. I mean, when I was on meds for a couple of years too, but I mean, it was just gradually better and better. Part of it was challenging my own thoughts because I, could definitely catastrophize, was definitely my natural inclination. My husband used to call me the "what about tomorrow" girl, you know. Even if everything was fine today in my mind, but that just meant that tomorrow something even more awful was going to happen, right? And so
Yeah.
it was really a process of challenging my own thinking, learning how to rewire my own brain, and think of it in a different way, but also just practice. But the group, seeing the other women, it helped me feel less unique and more secure that they're moving forward. I can move forward with them, like them. But it took really, I'd say, about 10 years of serious work for me to feel like I was, as I say, 92 to 95% recovered from all that trauma. It took a while, but it's not like it's bad and then it's a light switch. It's better, 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 right, over time.
Yeah, that's awesome. What about, like, did you have a lot of hypervigilance, and then that kind of lessened? Was that big
Yeah.
for you?
I mean, for me, it was always just about like any little mistake. I really felt like if I made it, even let's say at work, any little mistake, and I was just going to lose my job. They would never, like, there would be no reflecting back on all my 2 years of good work, right? It would be like one little thing and it's going to
Yeah.
blow up in my face. I also had a lot of catastrophizing. Like, for example, if I came home and my husband's car was in the driveway and he wasn't supposed to be there, emotionally and in my mind, the only answer was he was dead inside. Like, why else would his car be there? Like, in my mind, there was no other possible explanation. I was always leaping to the catastrophic explanation because that's what I grew up with. I grew up with everything was maybe normal for a while and then it blew up and also out of my control. I mean, one of the things I actually had to learn in recovery was that my actions have a significant impact on what's going to happen to me. They're not they don't decide, they're not 100% the decision maker. Things can happen sort of out of your control, unexpected things can happen. But when I was a kid, what I did and what happened to me, they were not connected. And so I didn't
Mhm.
really appreciate that I had to trust that mostly my good efforts will have positive results. And then the other thing was I had to learn that even if things went amiss, I would be able to handle it. Not doesn't mean handle it without pain. There might be pain, there might be anguish, but I would survive it. I would be able to handle it. I would be able to move forward. And it just took a while for those realizations to really sink in.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome. Um, so what do you think is, like, the biggest, like, the most important message, like, that you wish if you could tell yourself now or back then from now, like, about getting sober or working through the trauma, what would you tell yourself? Like, what's the biggest lesson you think?
I mean, if I could go back, I would really just want to reassure her,
Yeah.
that things will be okay. You are going to make it through this. You're going to have a good life. But I know even at the time, if someone would have said that, when my therapist would say things like that, I just wasn't able to absorb it for a long time. I just couldn't. There was just too much damage and too much pain. So I'm not sure I could really have move forward more effectively. I think there were points in my childhood where if people would have gotten me help, when I was younger, before I picked up, or at least early in my drug use, those were points where maybe the process sort of could have been disrupted or, shortened. But by the time I was fully through it and I was, in my 30s, I don't think I could have really moved forward any faster. I was doing the work I needed to do, and it's just not quick work. It's just not quick work. But I mean, a lot of recovery is about persistence and patience, right? I mean, that's really what a lot of recovery is about.
Mm-hmm. That's what I would tell myself, like, don't give up, because it's just exactly persistence, and that makes all the difference. Using like I just gave up automatic. I won't even try. So, that's totally cool to hear you say that. Okay, so she recovers and LifeRing as well, you said?
Yeah.
So
So
tell us about that.
yeah, She Recovers is not just for substance use recovery. It's actually also for trauma, mental health, other behavioral disorders like eating disorders or self harm, overwork. It's everything together, because almost every woman that has a substance use disorder has one or more of those other things to work on, right? And so
Yeah.
when She Recovers, it's not like in like let's say 12 steps where you talk about your substance use disorder in NA, but you talk about your eating in OA, or that it's all segregated. And She Recovers, it's all together. And part of it is because there's an interplay in why we develop these issues, but there's an interplay in our recovery too, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we really sort of, if you have mental health and substance use, you really need to work on them simultaneously if you're going to be able to have a strong sobriety and get your mental health to move forward, to improve it. And so we talk about it together. The other thing to know is that I think it's around a third of She Recovers members also do 12 steps. So She Recovers is also in multiple pathways. And so members come from all different other approaches, and they're all accepted in She Recovers. It's really just about the women being mutual support. And so they have daily gatherings online. There's a private Facebook group where the women offer each other help. There are retreats and conferences. There are dance and yoga, because it's the body mind connection is part of She Recovers. So there are yoga meetings and dance meetings, and there's a lot going on for the women there.
Cool. I'm going to put a link in the description so anybody can go see it. I had known of She Recovers before I knew you're a part of it. And I don't say where I work on here, but it's just cool because I saw that they're, a part of it too from my job. So that's kind of like cool seeing the connections and stuff. And then LifeRing, you were talking about LifeRing already, right? So you said you're a board member. Is that like a founder, or how was that? Like,
It's actually been around since 95. So I went to SOS, which is sort of their LifeRing's parent organization. LifeRing broke off of SOS in 95. And so they've been around for a long time. I've been on the board since 2017, I think. So
cool.
we have in-person meetings, but also if we're not in your local community, we have online meetings. And the website's got a lot of info. We have a workbook. We talk about a personal recovery plan, but some people like us to do that in a structured way. So LifeRing actually has a workbook that helps people build a strong personal recovery plan. It's like broken into 9 areas of life, like my exposure to drugs and alcohol, or relationships, or feelings. And it's checklists and fill in the blanks and worksheets. So it's not telling people the answer, it's helping them do the analysis. And we actually sell more workbooks than we do our basic text, because a lot of recovery coaches like to use it. And so if anyone's thinking, well, how the heck would I build my own plan? I don't know how to do that. The LifeRing workbook is actually a good tool if you want something a little more focused, a little more structured.
I'm getting one. I'm going to use it with my clients. I look for different things like that all the time because I want them to find their own way and their own pathway. I don't want to push one way or the other because that's just not how it works. So that's awesome. And I'm going to put the link for that too. I'm going to put the main website and then She Recovers. This is all really good. All these resources we need as much as we can because um, I only heard that there was one way too when I got sober. And so I did that because I was desperate and continue to do that. But, you know, it's not fair that some people that maybe not that don't identify with it can't get sober. You know what I mean? Like that's not cool. So I want to offer as many alternatives as we can because I don't think they're all out there either. Like it's not as common to hear about it. A lot of the rehabs are just strictly one way and if you don't want to do it, then you're in denial and you're not going to get better. And you're not being honest, and just all those things. And I think that's the wrong message, you know?
I think it's a dangerous message. I mean, if I would have believed them in rehab that there was only one way, I would have given up because it wasn't a way that would work for me. It's also not true. So why would you say it? You know, it's just not true. And so there's no point. Look, I think that offering newcomers our experience. Here's where I think we go wrong. I think we go wrong when we say, this is what worked for me, to this will work for everyone, or even worse, this is the only way that works, right? Those are big unfounded leaps. I also think it's wrong to tell people what they must do. I do think, however, there's value in sharing our experience, right? Here's what I did. Here's why I found it useful. I'm offering it to you for your consideration, for you to think about, right? There's value in that. I got a lot of good ideas from other people. I got a lot of techniques and approaches and reassurance from what other people were telling me. I didn't just, blindly follow it, but it was still useful. And even if it wasn't useful for me, sometimes it was something I would remember and offer up to someone else who might find it useful, right? Or if it wasn't useful for me today, maybe 8 months from now, I'd remember because it was something I thought I could use based on what was going on at that point. So, I mean, it's important to share. All of our, experience has value, but to misinform about there being only one way, or that you have to do it, exactly this way, that's dangerous. And it doesn't, to me, really, it doesn't take into consideration the individual standing in front of me. For the individual standing in front of me, for her best interest, I think we need to be honest about the whole picture and the options so she can find her best place.
Oh, yes. Yes. Seriously. You have no idea. It's just me and my friend on Twitter, we always talk about this too. And we're like, how can we like include everybody and accept everybody, because we don't believe in one way, and we did it differently too. So it's just like, if we want to actually help people, shaming them and telling them you must do this or you're done. Like, people did that to me, and it pushed me away. And so I don't want to ever do that. I'm like really, really trying hard to watch myself and make sure I don't do that. I think that pushes people out, and they won't get help at all if that's the case, and it is dangerous. So I really appreciate that message. Seriously.
Thank you. I mean, look, on the other hand, a lot of people like the structure 12-step. There's positive, right? The sponsorship, it's pros and cons, but you find the right sponsor, and that can be a really valuable relationship. And that's really mostly a 12-step concept, right? And so it's just really about what's the right fit for each person and being open to that. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't ever want to disrespect any particular program, but at the same time, I know a lot of people that have done it all kinds of ways. I know people that have done it exclusively Women for Sobriety, exclusively LifeRing, exclusively Smart. And I know people that have mixed them up or, changed them or modified them. And so the good news is there is now an internet, and you don't have to go to the library and you can research these options. And there are others. The ones we've talked about aren't the only ones. And there's Recovery Dharma. That's a Buddhist-based option.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and sometimes there are local ones that are really just in your local. Sometimes there are ones that are like, I know there was like in Phoenix, there was one, or no, it's Denver, where it's like they have like a bike riding club for people in recovery. I mean, there's all kinds of different subgroups, so you do a search and open yourself up to whatever sounds best. I really think if people read the philosophy and the meeting format of different options, one or two are going to sound like my people are there. So go to that meeting. Go to the one where it sounds like you're going to feel comfortable, because people that sort of fit your worldview are going to be there at the meeting too.
Oh, so cool. And so before we finish up, I just want, what is anything that you want to say? What is your message? Anything?
Multiple pathways is definitely a part of it. I do always really try to be a reassurance. I had a pretty abusive childhood, physical, sexual, really no connection to mom, multiple sexual assaults, violent boyfriend, 20 years of using, and yet, with recovery, both from the trauma, from the mental health, and from substances, life has been amazing, especially the last 15, 20 years. And so I hope that my story can help soothe people's fears, or also the friend and family's fears, right? If they have a loved one who's struggling, to know that, there's still hope, that people find their way out at different times in their life. Maybe they'll find their way out at 25, maybe at 32, maybe at 42. I mean, it's all different time frames. But that there is a beautiful life forward, but it's going to require work and that patience and that persistence, and also losing that self-critical. Where none of us are perfect in our recovery. None of us are. And it takes time to build up the skills, not just for sobriety, but for life.
Yeah.
It takes time. We don't have experience in dealing with most areas of life in a healthy way. It's going to take us a while to be able to do these things effectively and from a loving place.
Oh, well said. Yeah. And it's all new. Like, I learned how to be an adult in
Yes.
sobriety. I mean, I'm kind of there, but I'll let you know how it goes. I'm working on it. I still feel like a little kid, but maybe that's good, in a way, to feel young. But I really appreciate you coming on here, and I'm going to post all those links for everybody. And I want to also put your social media contacts on there too. But tell everybody where they can find you mostly.
So the book, and again, it's From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, is on Amazon and all the usual sites, or bookstores have it or can get it. My Twitter is at MaryBethO_, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And my website is junkietoJudge.com. And that has, I read opinion pieces, like I've had pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and others, and they're on my website. As well as more information. You can also message me through my website, and I answer all messages. And I do a lot of speaking. And so anytime there's, any opportunity, feel free to reach out. Or I don't know, 6 months from now, you forget and you're like, Mary Beth, what are those groups you mentioned? Just send me a message and I will answer.
Oh, so cool. Thank you so much, Mary Beth. It means a lot. I really, really appreciate it. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us.